So they're early for us. 1. Okay, excuse me, if I can get your attention. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Colonel Mike Indovina. I am the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command Public Affairs Officer. This afternoon, myself and Colonel Chris Garver from U.S. Army Pacific will be briefing you on multi-domain battle. Has anybody heard about multi-domain battle lately? A little bit? Okay, it's kind of out there. I know you have at CAC, so good. Next slide, please. So, just want to start off a little bit about the noise out there, okay? And I'm talking about media noise. You have fake news, you have influential news on different peer enemies. And our goal there is to try to get above that, get through the noise and get our information out to our audiences. Next slide. So this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about multi-domain battle. What I want to talk to you about a little bit is where multi-domain battle came from, the origin, a little bit about what TRADOC does, and then talk about how we communicated multi-domain battle to get from about a year ago or so to where we are today. So next slide. So a little bit about TRADOC kind of ties into it's not the TRADOC pitch, but it ties into multi-domain battle. So we have 4 things that we do. It's design, acquire, build, and improve the Army. Most people probably understand TRADOC is improve because you go to all the schools, okay? And you don't understand about the acquire that we recruit all the the soldiers in the Army and the officers through ROTC. And we build the Army by being in charge of all the basic training in AIT, which also includes the bullet courses and I-bullet courses, which is your Army officer initial training. So with that, I'm going to talk more about design today because that's what multi-domain is. It's part of the design. It ties to one of the 3 priorities of the Chief of Staff of the Army. Number 2, building the future force. And that's what we do at TRADOC. So to understand a little bit about what multi-domain battle is, a concept versus doctrine. So doctrine, if you all know, and most people do, but I'll just talk about it a little bit, it's how we fight today, okay? It's how we are organized. How do we do things on the battlefield? Contact, movement to contacts, how you fight the forces today, okay? So that's kind of what doctrine is. Multi-domain battle is not doctrine yet. We just got a portion of it to talk about the battlefield framework in FM 3.0 that just came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago at AUSA. So we're starting to get that narrative into doctrine, but we're still at a concept. So what is a concept? What is the multi-domain battle concept? It is how we are going to fight in the future wars, how we're going to fight in 2020, how we're going to fight up to 2050. So when people look at multi-domain battle and they say, hey, I don't agree with this, that's okay not to agree with it because it's still just a concept. The origin of multi-domain battle. It started about April 2016 where the Undersecretary of Defense came to us and said, hey, listen, we have a problem to win in the future wars. So Army, I want you to go solve this problem. How do you solve that problem? We come up with a concept. So this is not new. This is an evolution of doctrine. We started air-land battle, Army operational concept, and now you can call it almost like air-land battle 2.0, but it's multi-domain battle, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, because we're short on time, I apologize for that. I'll probably just kind of give you the cliff note of what multi-domain battle is, talk a little bit about the battlefield framework, and then we'll go into a little bit of how we communicated this over the last year because we feel that this was a very successful campaign, and I think we feel it's successful because everybody's talking about it these days. So I think that was good. And then we'll show you some positives and negatives of our information or our public affairs or engagement campaign, who was part of it, and then talk a little bit about where you can get some of that information. And I'll tell you, I'll kind of talk a little bit about multi-domain battle, but at the end, just like Jerry was saying, I'll give you something for free this morning, is where you can go and find out where you can get all this information. And we've put a lot of work into getting that information out, not just from an Army perspective, but from academia, from industry and just people that are interested in the future warfare. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So multi-domain battle, what is it? Okay, so the best way to describe it, next slide please, and I'll go with the battlefield framework is the best part to explain this. So when we looked at multi-domain battle, we looked at it more from a problem-solving situation. So we had air-land battle where we had rear, close, deep fights where the enemy, we would kind of have different echelons. It was more linear type of fight, okay? So now what we're looking at is when you look at the problem of multi-domain battle, and one of the things General Perkins, our commander at TRADOC, says is, hey, listen, if we're going to change something, you got to define the problem. Okay, that's the first thing you got to do. And this is where he came up with multi-domain battle. In the past, multi-domain battle, you had, okay, I've got armor problems, I got air problems, I got maritime problems, and everybody kind of stovepipe. Intel problems, signal problems. And so he kind of came up and said, listen, we have to solve a problem, because when you bring all these different problems together, all right, you have to then synchronize these problems. And everybody's looking at it from their situational awareness, and then you have to deconflict all these different problems between air, land, and so on. So as I talked about earlier. So then he said, listen, we have to bring this all together, because this is no longer a linear battlefield, and we have to look at how do we solve the problems, because everybody's coming at us. Okay, it's no longer, if a brigade's fighting, it may not be the close fight. You might be getting attacked from a cyber perspective. You might be getting attacked before you even leave your home station. And the information campaign part of this, or domain, also talks about fake information, and it could also influence the political decisions, economical decisions on what happens, so they could just change the whole mindset. So you have to be ready to fight. We've done it before, but you always have to be ready at home station, okay? So kind of in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about in multi-domain battle. The biggest thing is it's a problem solution. You have to define the problem, and then you have to take those situations and collaborate with the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps. Okay, right now we've got the Air Force working very closely with us at Langley. We also have the Marine Corps working closely with us. The Navy is also working with us. So we've kind of started getting everybody together. But the main point I really want to talk about is this is still a concept. One of the things that we're doing is collaborating with all the services, collaborating with industry, collaborating with other services and other agencies to try and figure out what this should look like. And it could change. Right now, it could look where we're at, but in a few more months, as we try and solve that problem, it may change a little bit. So with that, I'm just going to kind of stop on multi-domain battle, because that's really kind of where we're at. We have doctrine out right now, talking about the battlefield framework, and we have a concept paper out, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in the future, towards the end. So now what I want to do is talk a little bit about how we communicated this problem. Because when I looked at this, I said, I can get into the nuts and bolts of multi-domain battle and talk details, but I have other places that you can get that. Okay, one of the things I look at is, from my perspective, is you got to understand it, okay, as the public affairs officers, but our operators can explain it from their foxholes. So what I like to do is show you how you can get that information, and how we communicated it to get to where we are today. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so our planning. We said, okay, just like General Perkins always tells us, you got to solve the problem. Mike, hey, what's the problem? How are we going to solve communicating this to our audiences? Okay, so we said, all right, we looked at, just like, you get higher headquarters, you got national capital region, you got stakeholders, you have community, you have the Army. So we have all these audiences that we have to look at and determine who do we have to communicate to. So we have a very robust commanders planning group. So I will tell you, and I'm not going to take credit for what we haven't done at TRADOC as a public affairs, but we were part of it. So we had some strategic planners, some strategic writers up in the CPG and Commanders Planning Group, and they came up with an engagement strategy. And so we said, okay, well, we're going to be part of this because we're the communicators and we have to get this out. Because they were kind of more looking at from an industry, from other avenues of how to commute other mediums. And we said, hey, listen, we got other mediums just as well, or other individuals that can get this message out to their publics as well, internally and external to the Army. So what we did was we decided who our stakeholders were. I mean, very common public affairs, who's your audience? And then we gathered our congressional affairs officer, we gathered our CPGs, our G3s, our G2s, because everybody in TRADOC at the different echelons or different functions are contributing to multi-domain battle. So we wanted to look at several prongs of how do we communicate multi-domain battle, not just from a public affairs standpoint, but from other avenues of other leaders that can help us out. One of the things we talked about was, blogs. So War on the Rocks really kind of is one of the milestone blogs that kind of started the discussion to kind of get feedback from the external audiences of how we were kind of talking about multi-domain battle. So, and then we did traditional public affairs through media, through social media, through websites, and then just engagement throughout the community and other academia personnel. So, and then videos. That was another avenue, using the social media platform to get as much information out as possible. So next slide, please. Execution. So General Perkins, and he started off with his articles trying to reach out to the publics, the Army, external audiences to say, hey, listen, here is what I think multi-domain battle is. And he takes it from his information from all the other services and collaborations. Then he started with joint articles. So, and we say that because typically, like, oh, this is an Army problem. No, this is a joint problem because of all the different domains that we're working for through cyber and air, maritime. So he tried to collaborate as many joint personnel as possible to do this. So we rolled it out last year, about a year ago at AUSA. Got a lot of momentum at AUSA. We had about 40 articles last year that talked about multi-domain and got it out there. We talked about media engagement, so we go out to kind of similar with your Meet Your Army campaign. We're using that as another avenue to talk to people that are not understanding what multi-domain battle is. So talking about other audiences that are not used to talking about concepts. So you keep hearing, hey, listen, the Army, we're not doing well. We don't have enough equipment. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough people. So we said, hey, how are we going to communicate this to help build readiness? How are we going to help it to build the future of the Army and also care soldiers? Okay, so that's kind of how we did that. Now, one of the things that we talked about in working with the staff of TRADOC in our engagement, so it wasn't just a public affairs engagement program, it was a whole TRADOC public affairs engagement, engagement strategy, information strategy. So one of the things we saw throughout the year was there was naysayers. Hey, this is old wine in a new bottle. This is a bumper sticker. You're just kind of changing things around. So General Perkins said, hey, listen, how about if we decide to reach out to some of these naysayers and bring them in and see what they have to say. So about 2 months ago, we had a multi-domain battle working group. And what we did is we brought media folks in. This was non-attributable event. So we brought academians in, interagency, other services, like media. So it was an opportunity to say, hey, listen, we're going to tell you what we think multi-domain battle is. And because you're interested in it and you're writing articles about it, blogs, news articles, and so on, we said, hey, listen, bring them all in and let's see what they have to say. Because there were a bunch of people that were saying, hey, listen, we don't think this is the way to go. So General Perkins said, hey, this is a concept. I want to hear what they have to say. And then we can use that and then kind of shape it for the future. So I thought that was something a little different than, maybe it's just me, but it's a little bit different than what we weren't used to, of bringing people in to kind of get their input as well. So we took that as another engagement of an opportunity. So then we threw out the concept at AUSA this year. did about 35 interviews collectively around TRADOC, and we ended up getting about 72 to 75 articles published within a 2-week period about what multi-domain battle is, how people feel about it, what it is. And so now we're at the point where we're assessing and looking at those articles to say, hey, is our message being received? Is there something that's not being communicated properly, or are they still thinking that this is just a concept that should kind of say, hey, no, we don't need it, let's go another direction. So those are just some ways of how we're communicating multi-domain battle to our audiences that we've desired. Next slide. So as I was telling you before I transitioned over to Colonel Garver into task force, multi-domain battle task force, I wanted to kind of give you a quick assessment. Our phase 1 part of this thing was increased dialogue. So the boss was like, hey, listen, I don't think, back about a year ago, I don't think we're kind of getting the message out. So what did we do? We started pushing a lot of articles out just to get people to talk about it, to see what they have to say. And then phase 2 was, hey, let's get the key stakeholders together, like I talked about the multi-domain battle workshop, where we were trying to get people's ideas and what their concerns were. And then we're still in phase 2 that will end in December 2017. And one of the things that we felt that was kind of productive was, in a good and a bad way, was throughout the year, we had one of our new leaders come in and he mentioned, hey, listen, you're saying this is a concept, Mike, but you're putting so much effort, or not me personally, but the command is putting so much effort into multi-domain battle. People kind of think it's doctrine already. So we kind of took that as a good thing, that, hey, we've met the dialogue task, but we also said, okay, maybe we have to be careful about not making sure people think it's doctrine. And with that, we kind of touched a little bit upon doctrine, getting the battlefield framework in 3.0 right now to kind of get that thing moving. So, and then secondly, we have all the different information. So I talked earlier about getting into the details of multi-domain battle. So over the last year, we've collected about 275 articles written, pros, cons, or just what multi-domain battle is. We have videos, we have campaigns, panels that have all the information. So on our website, you'll see the link here, and I believe everybody gets these slides. But the easy thing is just go to the TRADOC website. Off to the left, there's a multi-domain battle tab, which has all the concept papers, the white papers, and also every article, every video that we've collected over the last year that will go into detail. YouTube, every panel from AUSA, every time General Perkins has had the opportunity to speak out publicly about it, you can hear, even internal to the audience. So we were at a conference like this, or a conference room similar to this at TRADOC, where he was trying to get the TRADOC folks to understand what multi-domain battle is. We even put that in there. So again, we're kind of short on time. I apologize about that, but I want to just kind of touch a little bit about what multi-domain battle is, but give you where all the resources are for that. So TRADOC website will be able to provide that detail to you. So with that, I apologize. It's a very quick overview, but I kind of want to talk more about the public affairs piece of how we actually executed this. And if you have any questions after Colonel Garver's done, I'll be available to talk as well. So he'll talk about multi-domain.
Okay, next slide, please. I'm Colonel Chris Garver. I'm the PAO for U.S. Army Pacific. And you may wonder, why does the U.S. Army Pacific involved in something that TRADOC is developing? Hopefully we'll cover that here for you shortly, because it'll give you a little bit of history of the development of kind of where we are in terms of why multi-domain battle is important, why it's important to us in the Pacific, and kind of where we are right now in its development. A quick map of the Pacific, 52% of the Earth's surface, and there's a lot of blue. People may not know that about the Pacific, but it's a big ocean, okay? And people often feel the Pacific is a primarily naval domain. Well, 100% of the people live on the land. The 100% of the surface of the Pacific Ocean is covered by the air, and space and cyber cover everything, okay? So we deal, especially over the last few years, have been dealing with the requirements driving multi-domain battle out there in the Pacific. First and foremost is, does anybody remember back to around 2011, 2012, Army was still heavily invested in Iraq and Afghanistan. Did anybody work in the Pentagon, or anybody hear Army or Navy and Air Force guys were talking about a concept called air-sea battle. Did you guys ever hear that? And all the Army guys said, that's them just trying to get in on it because we're the ones doing all the real work in Afghanistan and Iraq, okay? I was one of those guys who said that, all right? That, oh, quit coming up with stuff that doesn't matter. But what the Navy and the Air Force were looking at, in addition to providing close air support and all the things they were doing for us on the ground, is they were looking at what our competitors were doing. And our competitors were watching us. They were learning from how we were fighting the wars, and they were seeing gaps and seams and figuring out how they can capitalize on those. And what you have here is some examples of our competitors developing technologies and techniques known as anti-access area denial, A2AD, if you guys have heard that acronym. We're trying to get away from acronyms out in the Pacific because they drive everybody crazy. But, so, how can our competitors, who we're not necessarily fighting with, but we could be in the future, develop techniques and technologies that prevent the Air Force and the Navy from operating in a certain area? Anybody know anything about this area of the world here, the South China Sea? Anybody heard about these islands that are really shoals that have been built up by the Chinese with air capabilities, missile capabilities, and the ability to really close out the South China Sea from U.S. presence? And they say we're not militarizing these as they're building airfields and putting missile silos on these islands. And they're not islands even 24 hours a day, but they are islands part of the time, and suddenly it's a stationary aircraft carrier, and it's a stationary missile battery. And the idea is to keep us out, to deny us access to the South China Sea. Because what does China say? They want to be the deciders in the South China Sea. At the same time, North Korea, we all know what those crazy bastards are doing right now, right? Okay, so area denial and anti-access have been the watchwords on the DMZ since 1953, okay? But they have been investing in other technologies, and you certainly see the effect of the technologies they've been involved in, to include missiles that can now hit the United States if they can survive re-entry, and we're all still in the process trying to figure out what it is that their capabilities have. Can they hit Hawaii? Can they hit California and farther? We also have, not in our area, they are in our area, but we don't see the Russians doing this in area, but in Kathy Turner's area up in Europe, we see A2AD, area denial, anti-access in the Ukraine, in Crimea, and in the other points. So one of the things we say out in the Pacific is this is not a Pacific problem. This is a U.S. military problem for how do we address technologies and techniques that our competitors have been building while we've been slogging it out fighting insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq, okay? All right, so next slide. So Admiral Harris is the commander of U.S. PACOM, and Admiral Harris said, I need the Army to do other than Army things. And this is the crux of multi-domain battle. I need the Army to be able to influence into the sea. I need the Army to be able to influence into space. I need the Army to be able to influence into cyber. And the Army already is good at maneuvering on the land and doing the things it does on the land. But we all have to get out of, Admiral Harris's main point is we all have to get out of our stovepipes of thinking about our domains that we traditionally operate in. And he wants, if you remember back to the South China Sea, and if you can't get an airplane or you can't get a ship into that area, do we just throw up our hands and say we can't fight there because we have been denied access? No, you need another way to get after that. So he wants the Army to be able to potentially influence into the sea. And what Admiral Harris is saying is the Navy supporting the Army with coastal, with ship-fired missiles, they've been doing that a long time. They understand that. But what if you have a Navy ship that is less capable and caught by itself and needs Army support? We don't have a way to do that right now. We don't have a technology that can reach out into the water and hit a ship. Okay, we can't sink a boat from the land. The Marines can't sink a boat from the land. So now you have, if you're the PACOM commander, I have one service that can only do certain things. I have another service that can only do certain things. But I want everybody to work together, and I want all the services to be fully integrated, and we'll talk about that here in a second. I want all the services to be fully integrated so I don't have to try to figure out what capabilities do I have by where the pieces are on the board. I want the pieces on the board to be able to do different things to give me the capabilities that I want. And what, you'll see this in our themes here in a second, but what multi-domain battle, well, what we want it to bring is multiple options for our commanders, multiple dilemmas for our adversaries, for our competitors, okay? And we say multi-domain battle and joint integration. I'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so for an example, see, can we jump off this yet? But the whole point is, this is all about joint maneuver. This is all about opening maneuver space when we are denied access to an area in terms of periods of relative advantage. And that's an important concept to take away from this, because we are so used to, as the Army, as the US military, having dominance in domains. And I like to kind of talk about this. When was the last time an American soldier who heard a plane overhead had to actually look up because he was concerned it was coming to bomb him, other than a blue on blue incident, but it was potentially an enemy aircraft coming to attack him? When was the last time we had to worry about that? Vietnam, maybe Korea. When was the last time the Navy actually slugged it out with anybody? Yeah, okay. Really, World War II was the last time the Navy actually really slugged it out with another Navy. So we have had, for the last 70 years, complete dominance in certain domains. Over the last 15 years, while we've been slogging it out with insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan, our competitors have been building up. They've been watching the US, they've been building it up, and as General Brown says, especially with the case of China, they are the ones who have benefited the most in the last 70 years from the freedom that we have provided. And now they are challenging us on the global stage as competitors, and we helped pay for that over the last 70 years. But as their capabilities have risen, our dominance in those domains has gone away. And in some areas, we don't have any dominance whatsoever. Does anybody think the US is dominant in the cyber domain? No, those guys, it's the Wild West, to the Russians, to the Chinese, to the North Koreans, and our legislation and our rules prevent us from doing certain things. So it's as much a policy issue as it is a technological issue. All right, so areas where we had domains we had dominance, that is reducing. And there are new domains we have never had dominance in, and as a matter of fact, we're far behind. So what we seek is not dominance in a domain, because you really can't afford that anymore. To think of the size of the force we would have to defeat Russia or China in a full-scale, full-on fistfight war is significant. And so, it's a democracy. We try to pay for the least amount of military that we can afford, right? I mean, we don't want to pay for one soldier more than we actually need. So how do we get periods of relative advantage where we can enable joint maneuver? If you think back to that first island chain in the South China Sea, if I can disable a missile system or a landing deck for a short amount of time, then I can joint maneuver ships and aircraft into the area, and they can have an effect on a target that we're trying to have. Does everybody understand that? Does everybody kind of get the concept that you're trying to enable joint maneuver through periods of relative advantage in domains that we are no longer dominant in, but at least they're competitive or we're behind in? Okay. All right, next slide. So I'm a big fan of the battlefield framework slide that Colonel Indovina put up. So I want to quickly just show you how we're kind of looking at the North Korea problem. This is an example. It's not classified, and certainly we look at some things that I can't talk about today. But when you look at where we're considering, we used to have just the close, the deep, and the rear fight. You are now really talking on a global scale, all the way to your deep fires is the red area. We took the word fires out because China kind of gets a little nervous when you say you're a deep fires area. But we're really talking about deep effects. Okay, where are you going to start getting cyber attacked from? Where are you going to be potentially having space operations influence what you're doing on the ground? That can be global. So really, when you look at the idea of a battlefield framework for a fight in Korea, which used to be, well, where's the 38th parallel, and then stuff that's north is bad and stuff that's south is good, you're really talking about potentially global impact and global interest in what we're doing. So we look at Australia as a strategic support area. Of course, the United States is a strategic support area. Potentially, you've got tactical support areas in the areas around the air. So the Philippines could potentially be a tactical support area if they allow us to fly missions out of it. But these could change. What if the Philippines says, we don't like your fight with North Korea, we don't want you involved? And suddenly cyber attacks start coming out of the Philippines area. So now you're talking more of a deep effects, deep fires area, and you got to change your map, change the colors on your map. The only ones that we really don't look at a lot of impact coming out of Africa for the fight in North Korea. We don't look at a lot of impact coming out of South America, but that could change as well based on the political situation globally if a fight does start. So the battlefield framework allows you to look at the problem from a much, as we as communicators know, from a global perspective. Because I can be sitting in my basement in Michigan and have impact on what's going on the internet in North Korea, or what's going on in the fight in North Korea. Or I can be sitting in a silo in Russia and be conducting space operations that influence what's going on the battlefield in North Korea. Okay, everybody tracking on that idea? Okay, great. Next slide. All right, so we've got 3 lines of effort out in the Pacific for my commander, General Brown. Second one is set the path to multi-domain battle, which is future fight, okay? And so you can see we develop themes, of course, as PAOs. We develop themes that support that and help advance those ideas. And theme number 2, of course, ties into both joint integration and multi-domain battle. Back to, again, the idea of multiple options for our commanders, multiple options for, or multiple dilemmas for our adversaries. We then got tagged, the Pacific got identified by the CSA to be the operational lead for developing the multi-domain task force, which is if we're going to operate, if you have a force that can operate in the 5 domains, not counting information because that's kind of new, but if you look at air, sea, space, cyber, and land, what does a force need to do that? What force do you need, thinking back to the map in the Pacific, that can potentially influence out into the ocean, that can influence space, influence cyber? What level of command do you need for that? There's a lot of questions involved in it, and the least of which is not what does the doctrine say, because there is no doctrine yet. It's in development stage. So instead of, and what all of our senior leaders have said is, it took, 12 years to develop air-land battle? We don't have that time anymore, okay? We do not have the luxury of developing 12 years of doctrine. You come out with a set of tanks and F-16s and some other things at the other end that allow you to fight that doctrine. It has to be done much faster, okay? And we all certainly understand the impacts of the speed of human interaction at the global level. So we are trying to look at, well, what does a multi-domain task force, a task force that can operate in all those domains, what does it need? And so we've got a program over the next couple years to develop it, exercise it, which will show you just quickly, and then our concepts that we develop, lessons learned, will be feed back into TRADOC to help them solidify this idea of what is multi-domain. Ultimately, the Chief of Staff's goal was a multi-domain task force per ASCC with a set TDA, set table of organization, or TONE, I guess, a set organization that is flexible for each theater, because Europe needs something different than the Pacific does, okay? You know, we need swim fins and goggles, okay? They don't need that as much in Europe. But then at the same time, he's trying to stand up 5 new SVABs, and he's trying to do a modernization command. There's a lot of things going on competing for the Army's attention right now. But the thing I really want to leave you with is General Brown's quote, 2 things on this slide. One is General Brown's quote at the bottom. People say, that's just air-land battle 2.0. Okay, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary. It is an evolution from air-land battle where us in the Air Force figured out how to kick ass on a force moving through the Fulda Gap and into the plains of Europe. That's what air-land battle was designed for, was to beat the USSR. So now we're looking at new problems, new challenges our competitors have been developing. This is a way to get after that, but what we're looking for is revolutionary impact. Can the E4, tapping on a computer screen, provide a revolutionary impact to battlefield in a way an E4 has never been able to do before, okay? And the second thing I want to point out is, and I kind of mentioned earlier, is we've inculcated the term joint integration because really my boss feels we need another Goldwater-Nichols Act to force us to work better together as all across the whole joint staff. So we use examples, and part of the PA effort has been figuring out vignettes that help tell this story. But you look at a vignette of, who's got a cell phone? Who's got a cell phone in the room? Okay, everybody has a cell phone, come on. All right, but what if your cell phone only connected to one tower? Would that be a very good cell phone for you? Okay, but we buy weapon systems that only work off of one sensor platform. So I buy a missile, but it only connects to one radar. So in essence, if the commander wants to use that missile, he's got to make sure that the sensor is in the right place. Well, why aren't our weapons like our cell phones that can work off of every cell phone tower? And we call it sensor agnostic, shooter agnostic. Don't care where the signal comes in, don't care who pulls the trigger. The Joint Force Commander doesn't care if it's a missile from a Navy or a missile from an Army or a missile from a Marine Corps. He just wants that ship to go away, to give him a period of joint maneuver advantage, all right? And General Brown will tell you, if we go to war in Korea tomorrow, we need concepts of multi-domain battle today, okay? We need the joint force to be working better together. I also like the one of, what if you had to have a TV for every channel in your cable box? So you had 500 wires coming into your house and you had 500 TVs because it only worked off of one signal. That's insane. You'd never buy a house, you'd never buy a cable system like that. But we keep buying weapons that do that for the US military, okay? So we need to get away from this single sensor, single shooter, you know, and so there are technical ways we're trying to work through that right now to get to a more full joint integration picture, so that when you need to sink a ship, you just need to say what weapon's in range. And somebody can see it, and somebody can pull the trigger on it, okay? All right, next slide. Okay, busy chart. The point of it being, the idea of a multi-domain task force right now is it's a fires brigade with some stuff added on. In a couple years, it's going to be its own structure with some stuff added on. And in several years, it's going to be its own structure. What it is not is a maneuver brigade. It's not a tank brigade or it's not an infantry brigade with extra stuff bolted on. All right, it is its own organic structure as we're trying to develop it. So we are not telling every armor brigade commander, you also got to be an expert in the cyber domain, okay? Or you have to be an expert in space operations. So now, what is this going to be? Well, we got an idea right now. We're working through some development of it, but we don't know. I mean, like, as we said, you know, we don't know what we don't know yet. We're going to go out and test this over the next couple years, figure out what works, what doesn't. We're going to feed it back to TRADOC, and we're going to take these lessons learned and kind of inculcate them into what is a multi-domain task force. What can it do? What do we need it to do, and can it do those things? Okay, next slide. So we got a 2-year exercise program. Next year we're going to do primarily U.S. unilateral ops, but we also have the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Koreans, and the Japanese, who are very interested in multi-domain concepts as well. As a matter of fact, the Japanese have a missile in a box that you can mount on a truck and shoot a ship with it. We're going to take a look at that as one of the sourcing solutions for how do we shoot a ship from a long way away from the land. Okay, so our allies in the Pacific are very interested in multi-domain battle, and they're very interested in integrating with us in this process. Because as you know, not only are we not going to fight just as an Army service if we go anywhere, it's going to be a joint fight, but it's going to be a multinational fight. And if you develop this great joint system, but none of your allies can use it or see it, how effective is it at the multinational level? Has anybody been deployed recently and trying to get allies on the network? We spent a year at CJTF OIR, and our allies in our headquarters couldn't get on our own networks to see what we were talking about. Okay, ridiculous.
We fight that every day.
Every day. You've got at least NATO Sydney or NATO BICES that you can work off of. We borrowed that, but some of the nations weren't in NATO. We deal with this in the Pacific all the time. We recently declassified the plans to conduct NEO operations from Korea to Japan so the Japanese can see it, and we're planning on using them as the staging base, okay? And we just 2 to 3 weeks ago, changed the plan so we can actually tell them what it is. Level of insanity you kind of worry about sometimes, all right? But the point is over all these exercises, we're going to be testing multi-domain battle concepts. how do ground forces integrate into the overall domains to say how do we influence those. We've already done one where we took a HIMARS, you guys know HIMARS, the rocket system. We did that and received a Navy feed through a network, and it was able to develop a firing solution to be able to shoot at that based off of a Navy sensor. So we're making some progress on some things we're doing, but we are still a long way away from where we're trying to get to. All right, next slide. And because it is a PA conference, as Colonel Indovina reminded me, we need to talk a little bit about the public affairs piece. From us, the guidance has been a little different, which was General Milley said, you can talk about MDB task force, the MD task force, but don't beat your chest about it, okay? Because he knew as a new structure, it would cause people's hair to fall out if we started talking about adding to the Army, where people would start asking, well, what are we going to cut? And we're not there figuring it out yet. So we've kind of kept a drumbeat going of kind of what the multi-domain task force is. My boss engages on a regular basis. We did a couple interviews while we were at AUSA to feed into the discussion of what's going on for multi-domain battle as a concept. The big important one, the two most important ones for us is what you're talking about is pretty esoteric, so there's not a lot of visuals to go along with this. So we're kind of struggling for what visuals help tell the story. And the second one is trying to keep it at a level where humans can understand it, okay? And that's part of the reason we wanted to have this discussion here, so PAOs have a better understanding of what are we talking about with multi-domain battle, what does it mean, and when people say, oh, I understand it, you go, or I'm an expert at multi-domain battle. You're an expert at something that doesn't really exist yet, so congratulations, that's pretty good. But try to keep it at a level that people can understand it so people can grasp the concepts, and it doesn't just exist in fires brigade guys' heads and wire guys' heads as to how signals get connected and all that kind of stuff. So we had developed some products. And our multi-domain pamphlet was the most popular at our booth at AUSA. So, a little analysis of kind of what flyers did they take away. They didn't care about USERPAC, but they were interested in multi-domain battle. All right, I got that. Okay, that's our prepared pitch. We got a little bit of time to answer any questions. We'll take questions on what do we think multi-domain battle is, on the task force specifically, on the TRADOC piece of development, and we'll just tag team this as we go. Okay.
Just one last statement. Just as a reminder, this is still an approach, just like Colonel Garver was saying, but it's about how our near-peer enemies are trying to contest us in every domain. So what we're trying to do now is how do we fight that? How do we deter that from 2025 through 2040? So.
Okay, all right.
So I'm interested in the second to last bullet there.
Can you go back one?
How to make kind of a conceptual.
Can we go back a slide? Whoever's in charge of slides. Okay.
Keep the conversation about non-visual concepts interesting. Keep in mind what our reporter said this morning. Big challenge. So what was your best success in pitching interviews or articles with external?
So I have a couple of journalists. We have a couple of journalists that have been writing about MDB from the beginning. One in particular, he's kind of, Sidney's the guy, Sidney Freeberg's the guy who's kind of keeping the discussion going. All right. But I am at the point where I have journalists saying, show me the money, okay? You've told us about this, but when can I see something in an exercise that you can point to and go, I'm a company commander and I did something that was MDB? We are just getting into that window in our exercise schedule where soldiers will be able to say, I did something and I'm able to talk about it. Part of the challenge will be getting commanders to be able to say, let that guy talk even if that fails. Okay, so we didn't take reporters on this when we were doing in Australia where we did the link up between the, and again, that was just some dudes typing on a keyboard and suddenly they went, yeah, okay, we got a firing solution from the firing data from the Navy. Not very interesting. In July, at RIMPAC 18 of the coming year, we've been tasked by the commander of PACOM to shoot a missile out of a box and sink a ship. There will be a lot of people interested in that. So we know there are some visuals on the horizon that we will be able to bring in reporters and show them, and a lot of folks are kind of interested in that. They know that that's a coming event. But we're just getting into the exercise piece of this where we can take a reporter out and say, here, I did something, therefore, and this is in the multi-domain battle development plan. We exercise this, and this is what the result is. So Well, Admiral Harris always says capability plus will plus signaling equals deterrence. Okay, so you have the Australians talking about MDB. You have the you've got the Japanese and the Koreans talking about MDB. We're talking about MDB, and we have on all of our Navy exercises, you get a Chinese ship that floats alongside you, watching you. So they will be very interested in June and July when we either do or do not sink a ship as well.
So to follow up with that, engagements. I mean, we don't have a big, slew of visual type of information right now. But the engagement for regional. So General Perkins gets out and he goes to UK, he goes to Australia, he goes out. So really, it's just a lot of discussion. And I will tell you, on the international audience, they're just trying to kind of start the discussion on it at their level. So what we've seen, like General Perkins will be going to UK here shortly, and this will be the second time he talks to them about multi-domain battle. So it's trying to get them to understand it, and how do they support it, and how do they become interoperability with that. That's kind of where we're at. NIE exercise is a good example of what can you see. So we have problems with our networks, as Colonel Garver was saying. At NIE, we test those networks. So it's a great opportunity to get, we have about 3 or 4 reporters, Sydney, Courtney McBride, who else is it? Jen Judson, that are covering it constantly. And the great thing about it is they're consistent with it, and they're thinking about it, so they're actually helping communicate what it is. So right now it's more just engagement, and in the international audience or regional is engaging the other armies to talk about what it is, and they're trying to just figure out how they're going to support multi-domain battle or be part of it. As I said, these are near-peer enemies trying to contest us in all domains, and what we're trying to do is get everybody on board to understand it first from a concept at this point. So.
Okay.
In your exercise planning, is technology insertion a concept for you guys?
Absolutely. I mean, we've stood up a cell in our headquarters that is our strategy and innovation cell, and that is what they do. Is they're looking at technologies to try to figure out how to employ this. And we've had several industry days where we go out and say, here's what we need, what do you guys have? And like I said, the Japanese have a missile in a box, and the Norwegians have a missile in a box that we're looking at to help us with one specific part of it. But we talked to Boeing and other industry folks as well about kind of what we're looking at, or how do we make these things work better. So it's a lot of it is about technology, and maybe what's not here, but what we need. And we're doing a lot of kind of fishing ahead to say, hey, here's what we think we need. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm from RDECOM. That's our.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Now, so we have a cell that we've stood up that is a multi-domain task force cross-functional team, and we've got guys from the Fire Center, we've got guys from TRADOC, we've got all who get to come. It's really sad because it's hardship duty to get to come to Hawaii for a while and spend time in Hawaii. But you probably have a guy. As a matter of fact, there's one of your colonels is on our staff, or Drew Downing is actually.
We have a fast officer out there, and we have a.
Yeah, so we've got those guys integrated into our headquarters right now, trying to figure this out.
I was wondering if it's a messaging concept of what you do too. If it's something you're considering along with other things, or one of the.
Yeah, and again, General Milley's concept is don't oversell this, So, and we don't want to bust an OPSEC window and talk about a specific. That's why the slides don't have specific networks as to how we're trying to link all this stuff. Oh, I said the word. Maybe if you know anything about firing networks, you know what I'm talking about. So how we're trying to link all this stuff together. There might be more than 16 ways. That's another clue. Sorry. So we don't talk about some of that. So trying to kind of figure that out when we get to a part where your headquarters has something that ties into what we're doing, we'll connect to you guys out there and say, hey, look, let's message this the right way to make sure that we're not out too far with something that we want to talk about, but we do want to signal the capability. So.
All right. Hey, listen, we appreciate you guys coming today. Apologize, we're out of time. We'll be doing another presentation at 15:25-ish, and then we'll be obviously here all week if you want to ask additional questions.
Tip your waitresses.
Thanks again.
We'll be here all week. So,
yeah.
All right.